Officer for Emphasis, and I'd like to welcome you to our presentation on the 9-month clock and your readiness. Today's event is being live captioned. The captioning is available at the URL shown on the screen, which I will read aloud. The captioning URL can also be found in the 1-hour reminder invite that you should have gotten about an hour before this event if you do need it. The captioning URL is https://www.streamtext.net/player?event the accessibility rule refresh and the 9-month clock, and there are no spaces in that URL. So I'd like to set the stage for why I've put together this webinar by sharing some context. And this all goes back to the U.S. Access Board announcement that came out on September 14th of this year, so a little over a month ago. That announcement shared with us and with the rest of the country that the U.S. Access Board has finalized its rule for the ICT refresh. In other words, this is an update to the existing standards for digital accessibility. Those standards are now with the Office of Management and Budget in Washington, D.C. for final review and adoption. That process is expected to be completed by December of this year. At that time, that kicks off a 6-month implementation period in which the federal government will have to get all of its digital content up to the new standards by June of 2017. Those new standards are the Web Content Accessibility Guideline Standards 2.0, Level A and AA. And this update directly impacts the federal government and any organizations and businesses that are doing business with the federal government or on behalf of the federal government. If your organization is not a company that does business with or on behalf of the federal government, there's another legal update that you need to be watching, and that is the legal update to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is currently being refreshed to include the same standards we're talking about here, which are WCAG 2.0A and AA. The only difference is the timeline for that update is a little bit farther out, about a year out. So we probably won't see anything until about December of 2017. But again, now's as good a time as any to start preparing and getting your ducks in a row so your organization can be ready for when these legal changes happen. Now, interestingly, we've already started having discussions with some of our clients around the legal changes and around compliance with WCAG 2.0, AA, and single A. And what we found is that 4 out of 5 finance organizations are not ready for this change. They've got technical issues where they're out of conformance, and they also don't have any defendable or transparent processes related to accessibility. So there's a program maturity gap as well that we've observed. Digging into the technical standards, the WCAG 2.0 standards, what I'd like to share is that there's a significant number of new technical standards. We're going from 16 old technical standards found in Section 508 to well over 30 technical standards. The good news is some of the technical standards are the same, so we still have to do alternative text for images, captions and audio description for videos. We still have to have skip navigation, our form fields have to be labeled. And there has to be no color alone information. And what we mean by color alone information is it used to be pretty common practice that if you had a form, a web form, and you asked people to fill it out, and then they pushed the submit button, and they did something wrong, they might get an error. And the error message might say, the form fields in red need corrected, or the form fields in red were missed, something like that. If you're an individual with a color vision disability and you can't see red, you're not able to distinguish where the error is and what form field is incorrect. So that's what we're talking about for color alone information. All of those are found in current Section 508, and all of those will be found in the update. There are some new standards, though. Importantly, there's some better defined requirements around keyboard accessibility and keyboard focus order. There's requirements around color contrast, meaning there has to be a certain difference between the foreground text that a person is reading and the background color behind it. And there are tools that can be used to measure that luminosity difference. There are requirements around how information is presented and accessed. There has to be multiple ways of navigating to a single piece of information. And the easiest way to comply with that is to have your direct click path, this, then this, and this, but also to have a search functionality or a sitemap. Another requirement is that changes of context must be deliberate. This is very important as it relates to drop-downs that are dependent on one another. So for example, if you think of an insurance website, and if you think about getting a quote, the first drop-down might ask you to pick your state. And then based on the state that you pick, the next set of drop-downs will automatically update to be a town that's found in that state. So what it means is that those changes have to be instigated in a deliberative manner. So a person has to navigate the list and either push the Enter key or push OK to first select the state. And then once that Enter key has been pressed or that OK button, then the second drop-down set can update to be the town. So it can't just all happen automatically as a person is scrolling through that first list. And then in addition to that provision about no color alone information, there's also some new provisions around no shape or position alone information. And this is very important to actual content writers. And a good example of this relates to the inclusion of figures and tables in a web page. It's very common to have some paragraph text, and then there might be a line at the end of that paragraph text that says blah, 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 as is shown in the table below, or blah, 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 as is shown in the figure below. And what that is, that's a sentence that is making reference to a table or a figure by position alone. It uses the word below. And so it's very easy to avoid that type of language by just making sure that you're numbering your figures and your tables. So that way you can say something like blah, 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 as is shown in table 1 below. So you can still say below, but you're not using below as the only way to delineate which table or figure you're talking about. You're also using the table number or the figure number. So those are some of the new things that we need to keep in mind with the new standards. So sort of the take-home message from this slide is that you might have digital content that complies fully with old Section 508, and that might lead your organization to think that they're in good shape. But the reality is we're more than doubling the new technical standards, going from 16 to well over 30. So just because you are compliant with the old set of standards does not mean that you're compliant with the new set of standards. And that's the big take-home message from this slide. Now, what we've done is we've looked at a number of large banks, insurance companies, and wealth management firms, and we've looked at their digital websites. We've looked at just the landing page for each of the banks and insurance companies and wealth management firms, and we've evaluated those against several WCAG criteria just to start painting a picture about what the landscape looks like. And what we can see is that a lot of these organizations aren't even meeting the basic requirements yet, such as alt text and skip navigation, both of which have been around since original 508. But there are some things that the web presence demonstrates very well. We did see consistent page titles, which is a requirement of WCAG. We did see consistent page language. One of the things that I do want to stress from this table relates to provision 2.4.4, meaningful link text. This is one of the easiest things to fix in a web site that will have the greatest impact for users. What we're talking about when we talk about link text. Link text is the text that a non-disabled user sees on the web page. Usually it's blue and it's got an underline and you can move your mouse over it and you can click on it and that link goes somewhere, to a new page maybe, or maybe to another section in the document. Usually that link text has a very simple text. It'll say something like, click here, or read more. And the problem is, when a screen reader user navigates a site, he or she has the option to navigate a site just by link text alone. So if all the user is hearing is, read more, read more, read more, read more, that is not at all helpful to the user. He or she has no idea what any of those links mean or what they go to. So instead, the user has to try to listen to every single paragraph to try to figure out what each link goes to. That's not a good user experience, and that doesn't jive with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So what we need to think about is just changing that link text so the text is more unique and it's more descriptive. So it could say something like, click here to get your rate, or click here to open an account. Short, simple sentences like that, where that whole sentence is link text, makes the experience so much better for both individuals who are using assistive technology and hearing that list of links, but it also makes it that much quicker and easier for individuals who aren't disabled, who are just skimming the content and are looking for links that are relevant to them. So in shifting from the technical perspective of accessibility, now I want to take a step up and look at the broader perspective of accessibility. And as I said, we've already started talking with our clients and with organizations about what they're doing for accessibility. And I think the biggest issue that I'm observing that worries me is that when I talk to these different organizations, there really is an inability to transparently show a commitment to accessibility and to addressing even the most basic program maturity questions. So for example, how do you test for conformance with WCAG 2.0A and AA? You can ask 3 or 4 people in an organization and you get 3 or 4 different answers. It's not consistent. And sometimes they don't even know. It's a very ad hoc method. And then that brings up the second question. Okay, it's good that you have defined processes. Are they consistent? Do you have a line of sight into the different divisions within your organization to know that everyone is using the same method, the same testing tools, etc.? Do you have the ability to show that accessibility is baked in at the life cycle and process level beyond just a QA check at the end? In other words, do you have checklists? Are you telling your graphic artists when they're developing charts and graphs to think about these provisions of WCAG? No color alone information. Think about color contrast, blah, blah, blah. Do the developers have their own set of checklists so they can worry about things like keyboard focus and keyboard navigation and form field labels? What about a checklist for content writers? Do they know about the provision about not using shape alone and position alone, etc.? Another good question is, what mechanism do you have for consolidating your accessibility data and using that to show your current level of enterprise-wide compliance? And are you using that to drive improvement on a routine basis? So in that context, I'm thinking about something like a dashboard, something that rolls up results, that can be forwarded up to senior leadership, and that if the Department of Justice comes knocking or a disability group comes knocking, you can instantly show that you do have a handle on the current accessibility of your sites at the enterprise level, and then go in one level further and say, here's our SOPs and processes for dealing with the issues that we're aware of. And can you paint that whole picture in a relatively quick time frame, or do you have to spend months tracking all this down? Do you have an enterprise-wide leader or driver for your accessibility program? Do you have a mechanism by which the public can report issues that they find as they're navigating your site? And if so, is that complemented with some back-end processes where that results come in, it's logged into a bug tracking thing like Jira, a web developer looks at it, validates whether it's an issue, and then that's queued for some remediation? Is there a formalized process to drive improvement based on the information you're getting from your public feedback? Do you have any mass scanning tools in place that you're running on a regular basis, again, to help paint that enterprise-wide compliance picture for accessibility? Do you have an actual accessibility and digital inclusion policy? And is it current? And is it public-facing? Do you have those SOPs that I referred to earlier? And again, are they current and are they accurate? Does your approach to accessibility extend beyond the HTML environment? Are you ensuring accessibility in PDFs, videos, office files that you publish to your site? What about your digital systems and digital apps? That's another big sort of perspective shift, is to help organizations think beyond traditional HTML and accessibility to these other things as well. And again, figuring out how to track those at the enterprise level. And then also, is there some form of an accessibility council or board that helps the CAO or who's ever driving the program to get that visibility into the different programs and lines of businesses and divisions to make sure that, again, as an enterprise, everyone is taking steps together and they're using similar SOPs with the same tools and the same methods so that everyone is moving towards the same goal in a somewhat uniform and coordinated manner. So in thinking about those issues, what's really needed is for organizations, in order to satisfy the WCAG requirements and in order to be able to address any queries that they might get from the U.S. Department of Justice or from advocacy groups, is there really is a need to think about accessibility not so much at the project and product focused level, which is where a lot of organizations are right now, but we need to supplement that by adding another layer, that programmatic view, whether it's a division-level programmatic view or better yet, an enterprise-wide programmatic view. And what that program needs to be doing is it needs to be collecting data to to build your organization's accessibility story, preferably on a monthly cycle. And again, this goes back to that idea of building this enterprise-wide database. So who's ever driving the program can, again, instantly at a moment's notice, pull this dashboard or database up and be able to say, okay, this site is 80% compliant, this site is 90% compliant. Overall, out of our 60-some sites, we are 70% compliant, or what have you. We need to make sure we're empowering that person to tell that story and give those answers. We need to make sure that there's a standardized method for testing across organizations. And in order to get that method, that means bringing the right folks to the table so each group can talk about how they're testing right now and try to move forward with something that makes sense, that's not a radical departure from what each group is already doing, but is something that's consistent and uniform and works. Same thing is a training for employees on accessibility. And this goes back to that checklist idea, making sure that, for example, graphic artists are empowered with the knowledge that they need, so each time they're making a new graph or what have you, they're doing it in a way that complies with WCAG. Same thing with QA testers, the developers, the IA folks, the content folks, etc. And interestingly, you can take training and you can actually build it around some of the data that you're getting that you've recorded in that dashboard. So for example, let's say that as you're going through and you're conducting your accessibility reviews, you find that a common theme is form field labels aren't being done correctly, or keyboard navigation is consistently missing. If those bubble up as themes from the audit findings, then those become great topics to do training sessions around to make sure that the development team and what have you is more consciously and more correctly thinking about ways to code to address those specific issues. This program level approach allows for interaction with senior leadership and to get their support and to do reporting. So again, they're prepared and they're knowledgeable in case they ever get asked. There's an ability to influence policy, influence the SOPs, what we talked about. Most importantly, when you're thinking about accessibility at that program level perspective, again, as I've already said, there's that need for clear visibility into the different divisions and different programs that are already going on. So again, when you make the decisions around what the accessibility policy says, what the testing methods should be, etc., it's coming from a place of consensus rather than just handing it down and expecting all the different parts of the organizations to just instantly adapt. And so this kind of visibility and this kind of information sharing and this kind of training typically takes a hub and spoke model where there's a centralized core that goes out to other centralized cores, perhaps at the division level, and then from the division level maybe it goes out to more cores at the project level. So when you can demonstrate, excuse me one second, when you can demonstrate an ability to do all these things, that puts you in a really good position to be able to deal with any queries you might get from the Department of Justice or disability advocacy groups. It also puts you in a very good position of just knowing that you are thinking about accessibility at the program level and can drive improvement across the enterprise instead of trying to drive it in an ad hoc, project-based fashion. Now, the good news is emphasis is positioned to help organizations with both parts of the journey. The technical conformance piece with the assessment of individual pieces of digital content, websites, videos, etc. But we can also help with the strategy pieces and the programmatic perspective that I talked about. And really, our high-level goal is that we want all of our clients to be successful in their accessibility journeys so that they are developing transparent, scalable, sustainable, and defendable processes so they've got a good program. And that is important not just for compliance purposes and legal purposes, but typically when accessibility is done well, like I talked about that link text, I talked about having a search function, etc. When accessibility is done well, it doesn't just make the content usable by individuals with disabilities, it also makes the content that much more usable by individuals who don't have disabilities. So it creates a better experience for everyone. And then again, when you are now including individuals with disabilities, that opens up a whole new population, which is potentially more revenue, potentially more growth. And a lot of organizations we work with have yearly goals around increasing revenue and increasing growth. So accessibility becomes one way that that can be achieved. There we go. One of the things that I think is a critical differentiator for us at Emphasis goes back to the technical review aspect. We have the ability not only to look at a site and assess it for accessibility, just like many organizations do, but we have the flexibility to deliver those results in a way that makes the most sense for you and your organization and your intended audience. In some cases, the review audits can be very technical and they're meant to be handed directly to a web developer to fix, or they can be more high level to feed into that big dashboard and facilitate reporting to upper level management. And we can do anything in between. One of the simplest things is just doing direct bug logging right into JIRA, for example. So there is no freestanding report. That saves money, it saves time, it gets the issues logged, and then once they're in JIRA, they can be pulled, they can be queried, and all kinds of graphs and data analysis can be done. So that's how we like to think about digital auditing. When we go to that program level view, one of the common first engagements is just a maturity assessment. We work with different parts of your organization just to figure out how ready they are. Do they have those defined processes? Is there education in place? Is there governance? What's your procurement team doing? Do they have language in their contracts for accessibility? And that's typically just an 8-week assessment, and then out of that we can come up with recommendations to help you take your program to the next level. One of the things that I promised that would be part of this webinar is a sample roadmap to help organizations to comply with that 9-month clock. So what I have displayed on the slide now is a sample roadmap that you can take back to your organization and use as a starting point, and then customize for what makes sense within your organization. No two organizations implement or execute accessibility in the exact same way because there's so many variables. Size, how the lines of businesses are set up, where the silos are, what the budgets are, whether it's an enterprise level priority or a project priority, etc. All of these impact how accessibility is done. So there's no real cookie cutter approach, but what I've outlined here I think is general enough that it can be molded to fit just about any scenario. So in month 1, the idea is to get senior leadership on board so that they know that this activity needs to happen. You get their support, and they'll probably loop you in with the compliance officer, who will probably be the one to sort of oversee the accessibility initiative or program. Who's ever driving the program then during that first month needs to be working with managers to start getting that line of sight into the different divisions and projects and programs and lines of business and existing SOPs, just so he or she can get his or her head around the entire accessibility picture. And that's a lot of work, and it's very difficult especially when your organization is big and siloed. So it takes a lot of time to build that line of visibility. Once you've got that line of visibility, one of the next things you need to be doing for month 2 is you need to build that entire digital inventory list. The websites, the PDFs, the Word docs, the videos, etc. Now keep in mind you're not going to be able to tackle everything at once. So as you're building that list, you're going to have to start prioritizing. And there's a lot of ways to think about how to prioritize. You can work with your analytics teams to figure out where you're getting the most traffic and the most hits. You can talk to your compliance teams to see if there's been any complaints made about specific pieces of digital content for not being accessible. And if so, those are going to need to be elevated in priority as well. So you need to start thinking about your priority sites versus your non-priority sites. And whenever you make the priority sites, those are the ones you need to hit more quickly and stronger. And then the non-priority sites you can hit less quickly and with less strength. Using an automated tool around month 3 just to scan everything so you can start getting your baselines for accessibility is a great way to build that baseline so now you have a starting point to chart progress. There's going to be some things that you can't scan through an automated tool. You can't scan a video. You can't scan non-HTML-based applications. So you're going to have to start thinking about manual testing and how that's going to work and align that again with the priority sites. So around month 4, you're going to want to be developing your manual testing SOPs so that you can get that tested starting. And you want to start that as soon as possible. Then you're going to have some results that you can start standing up around month 5. So you'll have that initial baseline from month 3. Then you'll have some initial actual manual testing results in month 5. So you can build that dashboard. You can continue to use your automated scanning tool to continue to track each month to month. So in theory, you should see that automated score going up and up each month. So you're starting to build your story of accessibility using data. Now, around month 5, you also might want to think about standing up an accessibility page, maybe as a footer link, so that users can start reporting issues and you can start building a practice around taking those issues, logging those issues, addressing those issues. And month 7 onward, now that you've started doing your reviews, you've got your data, you need to start remediating and fixing things. And then in tandem, you can sort of start to repeat this process for your non-priority sites. Now the reality is that you're probably not going to be able to address everything in the time frame that's allotted. So that's why it goes back to those priorities. You have to address what you can in the time allotted, which is by June 2017. You have to mitigate as much legal risk as you can. And then once June 17 comes, you need to make sure that at that point, you're starting to look at all the content that you skipped over, everything that you put in as a non-priority, and start dealing with that. And you can repeat that same pattern. For the non-priority stuff, you can break that down and say, okay, we've got 100 sites we designated as non-priority. We're going to take these first 10 and do them. Then we'll do these next 10 and so on and so forth. So this is just kind of a high-level way to think about tackling accessibility over the next 9 months. So I've boiled this presentation down to 5 take-home points that I hope will be helpful, and I encourage you to take these back to your organizations, to share what you've learned here or what you thought's interesting, and to start having those conversations to see if you can be a part of driving the accessibility program. And again, If you find that your organization needs some assistance, I do kindly ask that you keep emphasis in mind, because we would love to help you, and we're helping a number of our clients already. But the 5 take-home messages are: if you're an organization that does business with or on behalf of the federal government, you're going to need to ensure that your digital content is compliant with WCAG 2.0 A and AA by June 2017. If you're an organization that doesn't do business with or on behalf of the federal government, then you've got a bigger time frame to deal with, potentially December 2017. There is no reason to wait compliance efforts, because regardless of whether the ADA refresh happens in December 2017 or whether it happens sooner or whether it happens later, we already know what the end message is going to be. The end message is going to be conformance with WCAG 2.0 level A and AA. That's not going to change. So we already know the end goal, so we might as well start heading there, and then the timeline can come whenever it happens. The third point, critical to the success of meeting those standards and to answering those basic maturity questions that I've already shared, is being able to shift from a product and a project focus to include a programmatic focus, so you can build your enterprise-wide story about accessibility. Some hallmarks of a mature accessibility program include the following: SOPs and role-based checklists for accessibility, consistent testing methods that use a mixed methods approach to testing. When we talk about mixed methods, we mean some automated testing and some manual testing. There needs to be some enterprise-wide visibility and some enterprise-wide data, like that dashboard that I kept referring to. There needs to be an ongoing education program. There needs to be an up-to-date policy for accessibility. And there needs to be a mechanism in place for obtaining public feedback about accessibility and addressing that. And then, as I've already shared, emphasis remains ready to assist you in your journey with accessibility. So that is all I have for the presentation. So at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions. And if there aren't any, and you want to go back to your desk or go home and think about this, and then you have questions, please do feel free to email me. My email is my first name, Cristopher, with no H in the Chris part. So it's Cristoph.Broyles@emphasis.com. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look, and let's look at the chat. If you do have a question, feel free just to put it right in the chat. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I know I've thrown a lot of information at you. We will be emailing out this presentation either later today or tomorrow, so you can have a copy, so you can use it to go back and reference and think through. And again, if you need us, send us an email. We're happy to help. Thank you so much for your time today. We really, really appreciate it.